be doing that. Okay, the recording is in progress. Okay, so I need to hit, I think, continue on that.
So we have I created a YouTube account for the club, and I've been uploading videos. I just want to trim any extraneous off the beginning and the end before I open them up to be publicly viewable, but they'll be there shortly.
Yes, and we were almost ready to announce that for the newsletter this week, that the YouTube videos were up there. So about half of our programs have been recorded this past quarantine. So we'll have a number of them, and it'll also give us a place to put events in the future that if we may record them. So Greg has been setting that up while he's been taking finals for his class. So so that's why I didn't try and get that all set up, but it'll be announced in the next newsletter. You'll have the link for that. I think the link was in, but there wasn't anything up yet, so that you'll be able to do that. So now I can welcome our new board members, Barry Harwick and Jim Beatty, if they are with us tonight. I know that that Jim is, although he's attending under a different laptop, so you may not immediately recognize him. So without further ado, we're going to our entertainment portion. So Gina and I have been working away at trying to have her speak to us for the last couple of years, but the pandemic stuck its foot in and we weren't able to do it. So Gina is a class of this great class of 79. She's currently a professor at UConn. So we had to find a time after finals were over so that she wouldn't be distracted when she was speaking for us. And so I won't give you all of her titles because you've all got the links to her website. And I'm sure some of you have read some of her books and some of her articles and have seen her on PBS on the Mae West program. So now, Gina, I'm going to mute myself and you get to speak. It's about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have Q&A afterwards. And then I'll stay on chatting to anybody that wants to chat, as long as you feel like chatting. So we can have a nice relaxed time this evening for anyone who wants to linger. So I am now going to mute. So Gina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sue. And thank you for everybody who's got a computer on this beautiful evening. I got the beautiful evening outside behind me, which is basically as close as I get to nature. Actually, I turned my back on it and am happily informed by it, which is, but I'm delighted it's a beautiful evening out, and I'm really happy to be here. Sue has nurtured this idea that I'm meant to speak to this group for the last year and a half. So I feel like I've had you in my hearts and my imagination for a very long time, and boy, you better live up to it. So I'm expecting some really interesting questions and some, dynamic responses. And Sue asked if there was going to be a quiz after the talk, and I said no, but participation points really count. So I will hope that you will make statements, you'll disagree, you'll agree, you'll do whatever you can to make it a fun time. And, I'm also, if you want to unmute so I can either hear you laugh or groan or do any of that, that's fine with me too. As long as you don't have like large dogs in the background or you're ringing bells or doing anything else. I mean, however you want to make it work, that's okay. So I'm Gina, I'm in the class of 79. There are a couple of, when I said hello to Stan Kala, and Stan, is it Kala or Kola? How do you say your last name? Yes, I'm you.
Sorry, I was muted, Gina. It's Kala. You got it right.
I got it right. All right, Stan Kala.
Good Italian.
A nice Italian, because I always said that I knew that it wasn't true, but I felt, even in the class of 79, that I was the first Sicilian that Dartmouth had ever let in, that ever permitted to come onto the campus, except for Michael Corleone. And he was, and Mario Puzo, who could have chosen any place to put the character of Michael. the guy who was the war hero, who was going to make good, you know, who is not going to be part of the Sicilian mob family that his father established. Where does Mario put him? That's as far away from the Brooklyn Italian Sicilian background as he could possibly go. He puts him at Hanover. Now, in 1975, which was just when like the movie came out, was right after the book came out, I'm driving with my father. I don't drive. I got my driver's license in 1987 when I got to Connecticut, because I never had a driver's license because I lived in Brooklyn. I came to Hanover. I didn't need a car. There were boys. I went to Cambridge University. I got my PhD back in New York City on 42nd Street, where my family always said I'd end up, you know, at the City University of New York. And only when I got to Connecticut did I need to drive a car. And I didn't even really need to drive a car because I, you know, lived just a couple of miles from the university. But I realized that no one would take a check in Connecticut unless you had a driver's license, because people, like, they would be, show us your ID. And I said, well, I have my university ID, I can show you. And they'd be like, no, where's your driver's license? I said, I don't have a driver's license. And they would dismiss. It's like I you know, like I just got out on parole. They really didn't believe I was a legitimate person without a driver's license. So I got a driver's license. But anyway, so I get to Hanover, New Hampshire. And there was a fraternity at that time that had a Godfather themed party. And I remember, like, they looked like all my cousins. And it was, I don't know what the Italian equivalent of doing like minstrelsy was, but there are all these guys who look like everybody I grew up with, and all the women are dressed like in my real clothes. Like I'm wearing, Sue said she was wearing, I'm walking around Hanover, New Hampshire in 4-inch stilettos because I want to look classy. And for me to look classy in 1975, I'm wearing heels. I had no idea that there was going to be like mud and non-paved walkways that I was expected to be on. That was not where I grew up. I had not visited the camp. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And basically, Hanover and Dartmouth had no idea what they were getting when they invited me to come here. So it was sort of an equal assessment. But I found out from Stan and from a couple of other people that there were a couple of other Italians who had been here before me, although I don't know of that many Italian American women who maybe had preceded me, maybe 1 or 2 in my own class, but not that many. And so it was as an undergraduate in 1975 when I walked onto the campus. And of course, I looked like everybody. In fact, I got out my freshman book. Do you all still have your freshman books? I bet you do, right? I bet you do.
Yes.
I still have it here. All right. So I looked up, you know, like what I look like, what everybody else looks like. And there were all of these absolutely lovely, beautiful young people. And one of the things that, having taught at UConn for 34 years, is that you realize that the young people always stay beautiful, right? We age, but the young people always stay. They always look like they're from the planet Pepsodent. They're glossy. They just came out of the wrapping. You know, they're under warranty. I mean, it's fabulous. It's very nice. Keeps you humble to teach. But I'm looking at all of these lovely, blonde, gorgeous, blue-eyed creatures who look like a cross between Blythe Danner, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Grace Kelly. And on a good day, I'm looking for my thing here, on a good day in 1975, I look like Janis Joplin, right? I mean, I have waist length. That's me. I have waist length. That's me. I'm not the guy with the glasses. That's me. I have waist length, curly, dark hair. I have heavy black eye makeup. I'm wearing like a tight black t-shirt. I'm wearing tight black Levi's. I got, you know, Fry boots on. I look like a hooker, right? These other girls all look like they're something out of the Sound of Music. They're like wearing dirndl skirts or something. They have like light embroidery. They're wearing Laura Ashley dresses. Now, remember in 1975, some of you remember, the whole thing was that you wore peasant dresses, Okay, peasant dresses was a big thing. I put on a peasant dress. I look like a peasant. I look like I'm carrying a basket of escarole on my back walking up Mount Etna. I don't, it, for me, it is not an ironic, lyrical sort of, comment on the way we have moved away from an agrarian agricultural society. I look like the contadina lady. So I'm realizing the difference between myself and the other people in my class in a way that perhaps they weren't noticing, but that made a big impression on me as a first year and first generation college student. I wrote a book about this. Maybe some of you have looked at it. I know Margot not is here. I mean, that she, we go back, there are some people I know who read Babes in Boyland, Personal History of Coeducation in the Ivy League, which was actually published by the University Press of New England years ago. And, but it actually is still taught. There's a wonderful professor on campus, James Dobson, and he teaches Dartmouth fictions, and Babes in Boyland is on the reading list. And so I have young people who are actually writing papers on that book and writing to me asking, like, for the Cliff's notes. And I'm like, do your own research on what was going on, the music I was listening to. You do the research. I can't, but I can tell them, no, that part's real. This part, I sort of fictionalized. This was what was going on. But true story. My mom died when I was a kid. So I was sort of raised by my Italian relatives. My mother was actually French Canadian. She was Quebecoise. And so I can say in two languages, in Sicilian dialect and in Québécois, and vraiment Québécois, c'est pas comme ça. C'est pas le week-end, on mange la dog, c'est pas comme ça. C'est pas le parisien français. And I could swear in both languages, but I can't speak, in nice words in both languages. But when I went out to tell my Italian aunts who were cooking in the basement kitchen, because Italian families lived in those 3-story houses on the outskirts of every city. And in the basement of Italian houses, you had the real kitchen, right? Stan, you can vouch for me on this. Anybody else who grew up near Italians, there was an upstairs kitchen that nobody ever used. It was perfectly applianced. It was immaculate. It was gorgeous. Nobody ever had a meal cooked in that kitchen. It was only the people who could sit in the living room that no one could go into. And no one could ever go in that room. That room, like working class people had that room covered in industrial grade vinyl. It was basically roped off like at a museum. You couldn't go in there. And so the real action was in the basement kitchen. So I go in the basement kitchen and there's my Aunt Josephine, and she's stirring a pot of red sauce that had been on the stove since 1944, right? Got better every year. She had an arm like a longshoreman, but just one arm, because she kept using the one arm to stir. So she's stirring the sauce, and I go downstairs and I go, hey, Aunt Josie, I got into college. It's my senior year in high school. She pauses, and like the earth tilts on its axis because she has never paused in the stirring of the sauce before. So, Venus, Neptune, they're thrown out of there. And she says, you're going to go to college? Where are you going to go to college? I said, one of my teachers at school said I should apply to this place. He went, they're letting girls in. I'm going to go to this place in New Hampshire called Dartmouth. They just let girls in. And I think she's worried about the money. And I said, I got a scholarship, I got work study, I got loans. And she said, Gina, you're going to go to school in New Hampshire? And I said, it's fine. I can take the bus. It goes from Port Authority. It'll be fine. I said, you're going to school in New Hampshire. I said, you're pregnant, right? And I said, no, I did really well on the SATs. I got really good letters of recommendation. She said, it's okay. Happened to your cousin Elaine. You can always come home. So I get to Hanover and I'm looking at Gwyneth Paltrow and Grace Kelly. I mean, I'm walking across the green and I'm thinking, I got 9 months before anybody expects me home. I might as well have a good time. Right? So I mean, I had no idea what this was going to be like. So I figured I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to figure this stuff out. And it was where I had no idea, but that this was going to teach me how to look at the differences between men and women's humor, which has been both my scholarly work and the books that I've written for a trade market, some of which have been bestsellers. Books have been translated into 7 different languages. I had been a syndicated columnist for the Tribune. They fired everybody, including me, or put on furlough, whatever that's called. Anyway, and I'm still writing for Psychology Today, and there's over 7 million views. And so I'm keeping myself off the streets. But it became my life's work. And it was really from Dartmouth that I learned this, because when I got there, I had no idea. I thought there was a 7-to-1 male-female ratio. I thought I was going to be like Miss Budweiser. I thought this is going to be great. I'm going to be like, my dance card will be full. This will be fabulous. I had no idea that boys would come up to me and go, why you come to a boys' school? I would be like, I'm here. It's not a boys' school anymore. I didn't realize that there would be banners saying better dead than co-ed across the roads where I'm walking, and I'm going like, I got in, better dead than co-ed. Whole hogs go home. That at least, so it's kind of inventiveness that I didn't understand. Okay. So that was a lot of fun when I got here. And, so these guys are like, and they're holding up the banners that are judging us on a 1 to 10, like in front of Mass Hall, as we're walking to dinner, to Thayer Hall, right? Because that was the one place you could eat in those days. I'm sure that was true for a lot of you, right? That Thayer was the one place. So I'm wearing my high heels and I'm walking to Thayer Hall. And I'm, guys are yelling, but I'm from Brooklyn. I'm used to yelling back. Right? So somebody yells out, can I get into your pants? And I yell back, I got one asshole in there already. And they never heard anybody yell back, because, what the women who were there were alumni daughters. They were raised correctly. They didn't say stuff like that. They didn't yell back at the guys. They didn't swear. They didn't do that stuff. So the guys were just like, who's that, who let her in? This was not, and so I learned to answer back. But I realized they didn't expect me, but I wasn't expecting them. So it was a big surprise for all of us. So the guys would come up and go, why are you coming to a boys' school? And they would come up and they would dare to say things like, you come into a men's school because you're a lesbian. And I say, okay, did anybody actually explain to you what a lesbian is? Okay, do I need to show you like a graph or like an overhead projector or something? It's like, if I was a lesbian, I maybe would have gone to a girls' school. But then a friend of mine who turned out to be a lesbian came up to me and she said, no, Gina, that's not the answer. She said, you know what the answer is? Said the answer, when somebody comes up and goes, are you a lesbian? The answer is, are you my alternative? And so that's what I learned to say. And then again, it shuts down the stupid conversation really fast. That's all you want to do. You just want to shut down the stupid conversation as fast as possible. And she explained to me that this was actually a line from the African-American activist Flo Kennedy, who is a woman who I have memorized most of Flo Kennedy. She was the one she actually presented. I don't know if it was in front of an appellate court or it might have even been in front of the Supreme Court, where she was wearing a pantsuit. And one of the judges took offense and said, ma'am, you are not, Madam Attorney, you're not supposed to wear trousers in the courtroom. And she said, Judge, you don't comment on what I'm wearing. I won't comment on what you're wearing. And, it's like, you just have to have the answer. So I learned fairly quickly as a student at Dartmouth to answer back so that, somebody says, what class are you in? You go, trying to get into upper middle, trying to, you just come up with something to avoid conflict. It wasn't always easy. There were hard parts. What was great was the faculty, even the faculty who weren't always welcoming. Did anybody have or know James Cox, who was an Americanist professor? He was a great teacher and he was a real scholar. But he got up in front of the lecture hall. He was a favorite with the Greek boys, the Greek system. I don't know, people of Greek origin, and they would give him, I think, a bottle of Jim Beam that he would keep on the desk, because it was one of the larger lecture halls, and the drink at the last class. And it was a Southern gentleman. Again, my husband is an American scholar, and so knew Cox's work from way back. And again, was impressed that I had studied with him, although studying with him was, I don't know whether either of us would have called it that, but he got up and at the beginning of the class said, I am, and I can't do a Southern accent, he sounded like Foghorn Leghorn. And he said, like, I am an American scholar teaching a course about a sperm whale. My name is Cox. The name of the whale is Moby Dick. Does anybody have a problem with that? And I'm like, no, sir. But he would then call. I mean, I would sit in the front because despite yelling back at people, I was actually a good girl and a good student. And he would call on people and say, Ms. Barreca, as a woman, what do you think about this passage? And I didn't want to answer as a woman. I wanted to answer as a reader. I wanted to answer as a student. I wanted to answer as, you know, an emerging scholar. I wanted to answer as somebody from Brooklyn. I wanted to, you know, whatever. I was like somebody who didn't go outside, you know, had only been to the beach as far as the waves went out. It's like, but as a woman, and at one point then I decided, you know what, if I'm going to answer this as a woman, I'm going to answer everything as a woman. So as a woman, I think that part with the coils of the rope that goes on for 46 pages has a lot to do with like a calling Dr. Freud moment. But then I decided that I would also say, like, as a woman, I'm having the meatloaf for dinner, but I'm having it as a woman. And I'm going to have mashed potatoes I mean, if we're going to say everything as a woman, then I'm going to do this. It was a bizarre time. There was a lot of conflict. And it seemed to me that the best way that anybody could deal with that conflict was to laugh about it, not to get rid of the conflict or to diminish it, but to sort of shine a light on it and to bring it into focus and to show sort of how ridiculous it was. So that, again, it's one of the stories, as the English would say, that I dine out on. But when I walk into Thayer Hall and there's that picture of Daniel Webster, and he's there with his fist in the air, and you know, it's the unofficial motto to the college. And I always abbreviate it as, right, it may be small, but there are those who love it. It may be a small college, but there are those who love it. And I walk in after my first week and I said, that's a funny motto for a boys' school. And all these guys named Chip and Skip and Ace look at me and go, why is that funny? And I'm thinking, oh, honey, I'm not explaining this joke to you. But it occurred to me at the same time that if the motto for Smith or Holyoke or Vassar or any traditionally women's college had been, they may be small, but there are those who love them, it would not have taken 271 years for somebody to come up with the first joke, right? And that's the difference between men and women's humor. Because men's humor is out there, it's public, it's everybody's said this for 100 years, what's the big deal? But when women say it, they say it in that basement kitchen where my aunts were doing the cooking. They say it over that pot. They don't bring it out into the public. They don't yell back at the guy who says, I want to get into your pants. They keep it polite, they keep it nice. And yet, you know, the women here know, and the men who are with the women here know, that if you put 3 women together for more than 13 seconds, we're going to start to laugh. There is always laughter coming out the ladies' room. Right? There is rarely laughter coming out the men's room. And if there's something I learned at Dartmouth, is if there's laughter coming out of the men's room, we should worry. right? I mean, that's really, something's going on there that we don't really want to know about. And so it's, it's been, again, an interesting time. And so that I gave a talk to, it was the admissions counselors. It was the National Association for College Admissions Counselors, whatever that was abbreviated. So probably 600 people in the room, and I was a keynote. And so I got up there and I talked about, having the differences between private and public education. I wrote for years a column for the Chronicle of Higher Education. And so during the Q&A session, we're talking about, what kinds of mitigations, what kinds of gatekeeping or opening of gates or breaking down of walls are necessary for working class students, for to ensure a kind of diversity of students so that everybody isn't just swimming in the same gene pool at every school, da 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 da. And somebody said, well, what was, you told these stories about Dartmouth, but can you really give us one story that sums it up? That what was something that people didn't get that you thought that they should have gotten? And I reminded people that in 1975, the way that women my age were employing birth control, for those of us who were using birth control, was to get, it was that amazing moment sort of after the sexual revolution, but before AIDS. So, I mean, it was a really remarkable moment in time where really sex couldn't kill you. I mean, or you didn't think sex could kill you. It was astonishing. And I always tell my students this is no longer the case for them. But so we would go to get our diaphragms fitted, right? But to get our diaphragms fitted, we'd have to go to the Student Health Center. The Student Health Center at Dartmouth is called Dick's House. So you had women who got 1,600 in their SATs, women who were trying to be discreet, women who were trying to going out, I'm getting my birth control at Dick's house. I mean, this was just, and I said this, and actually, because I knew that there were some women who were from Dartmouth, who had actually gone to Dartmouth and who were working at Dartmouth in this group of 600. And so I said, where did women in 1975 have to go at the Student Healthcare Center to get our birth control? And this burst of laughter came out going, Dick's House! And they screamed Dick's House from the audience. And I just thought, I got to travel with these broads because it was so much more effective to have them yell it out. Because otherwise people are like, you made that up. And that's when I realized I couldn't write Babes in Boyland as a novel because I couldn't make anything up. Because if you made up Better Dead Than Co-ed, people wouldn't believe it. If you made up Dick's House, if you made up it's a small college, but there are those who love it, people would say, no, people wouldn't do that. And go, yeah, actually they did. And so I've had a lot to do with the college. It took me, I think, a dozen years before I came back. And it was my husband who said, I want to see where all these stories came from. And so we stopped. And once I started to return, I've kept returning, and I've made friends with an enormous number of people who I suspect I wouldn't have been friends with if we had been undergraduates at the same time. But I've changed, they've changed. We've sort of come together, we've enjoyed each other, and the stories are amazing. And I think that the years that people spend between 17 or 18 and 25 are such dense moments of their lives that it's what we keep returning to. It's sort of like Gatsby's, the end with the beating against the shore that keeps coming back to us. It's the waves that keep returning. We keep going back to those moments of our youth because experience is an experience until it repeats itself. And so those were first times for so many of us that we keep returning to those moments and looking at that moment in time and seeing it differently from other perspectives because we now have other experiences that give us a different sense of ourselves. And we go back and we look at the young person that we were and we see him or her, they differently than they ever could have imagined, than we ever could have seen. And I hope that at the best moments, or even at the moments I like to say, and again, the talks that I give, I often talk to corporate groups or municipal groups or whatever, and it's not only after there's a lawsuit, although it's often after there's a lawsuit they have me in. But that one of the things that humor allows us to do, and I'd love to, again, I'll end soon, but to get questions, discussion, conversation, that one of the things that going back and telling the stories about our lives, which after 40, we spend a lot of time doing, I think, is sort of harvesting stories from different parts of our lives, that humor allows us to redeem moments that would otherwise be lost to sadness, otherwise be lost to tragedy. That humor allows you to get your deposit back. That if you could go back and tell a funny story, you go back and you look at something that happened to you and you turn it into a story, it's yours. It's not just something that happened to you. The book that I did recently, which is Fast, Funny Women, and I edited it and I have a piece in it, but it's 75 women writers from age 20 to age 89, all different kinds of women, many of whom all of whom, almost all of whom wrote original pieces just for the book, including Pulitzer Prize winner Jane Smiley, Marge Piercy, one of the great American poets, New York Times bestseller, Hara Estroff Morano, who's wrote The Nation of Wimps, Judy Shineland, Judge Judy, who happened to be my next door neighbor in Brooklyn. So you want to know where the accent came from? Judy and I, we get together once or twice a year, and she's even shorter than I am. You could put Judy in a Happy Meal. And the two of us end up sounding, we're like talking like this going, no, your cousin was not married when she was pregnant. I mean, it was not, she was not. I mean, we're yelling at each other. Our husbands are going, can you keep them down, please? We've got Liza Donnelly, who's a New Yorker cartoonist. Mimi Pond, who did the cover, is another New Yorker cartoonist who's a best-selling graphic novelist, whose graphic novel, Over Easy, about her time as a server in a Haight-Ashbury diner, was also a New York Times bestseller. It's just an amazing bunch of writers. And they're all going back and telling their funniest stories, but very few of those stories started out funny. So as I say in the introduction, it's the only thing I'm going to read, that stories, regardless of length, live and die on the details. These brief and snug works, and any story that you want to tell, are as complete and self-enclosed as eggs. Although they're about a specific moment, feeling, or idea, each tale happens to be framed by 5,000 years of other women's lives. By addressing what's meaningful in life, by refusing to ignore it, dismiss it, repress it, atone for it, all good writing runs towards what's frightening, worrying, or shameful. Everybody has felt this way, it reassures us. Done a version of this, gone through it, come out of it, and triumphed over it. We're lifting rugs that others have swept under for generations, or maybe just revealing the mess we made ourselves. Writing it down is the opposite of covering it up. You get your deposit back on whatever weirdness happened. Writers know that experience is only a first draft. The future is a vault into which today's details are deposited, to be withdrawn later on, and when examined with compassion, amusement, and curiosity, made into a story. Humor doesn't diminish the significance of the event, but instead changes the script. The fact of being laughed at becomes precisely what makes others laugh. You're the narrator, and you have control over it. It becomes your story, as opposed to something that happened to you. And so that's why I've spent a lot of time writing about this, because it's become my story and not just something that happened to me. Thank you for listening. Thank you very, very much. And now I would love to hear your stories, or what you think about humor, or your rebuttals.
Thank you, Gina. That was excellent. Very, very funny.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so who would like to start? I have someone that didn't manage to get her Zoom link on, so I'm trying to get her the link. So who would like to start with a question?
Nobody.
Ginia.
I'm curious to know how you view now people yelling back on social media as opposed to being right there front and center and not anonymous.
I think that that's a really interesting question. Anonymous to me is always, except, I mean, Virginia Woolf, you'll remember from Women in Writing, said that Anon was a woman. But Anon was a woman because she couldn't afford to have her name linked to anything that was public, because especially women's names could only be recorded when they died, when they were married, or when they were born. Those were the 3 times, not necessarily in that order. And so that the idea of actually women being able to claim our names and to assign ourselves a voice has always been a big deal. The idea of yelling out on social media anonymously does seem to me to be cowardly. I don't care who does it. That you can't engage in a conversation if you're not using your voice. That's basically the equivalent of hiding behind a bush and being a stalker. That's somebody who is afraid to either claim responsibility, to vouch for themselves, to be able to withstand a comment that's made back to them. And I think a lot of the time, the people who, not just the boys who were yelling out of the frat houses or the dorms, who didn't expect anybody to answer back, who didn't expect, they expected people to be so ashamed of being taunted that they would never answer back. But I always think of W.C. Fields' great line is, it ain't what they call you, it's what you answer to, right? Such a wonderful line. And so it's like, you know, it's the, like you talking to me, if you're talking to me, I'm answering back. But if somebody then shouts something and runs away, I mean, it's the very definition of a coward. So when somebody, for example, on Facebook, I have a public Facebook page, and I'm happy to engage in conversation, including with people who are unhappy with what I've said or written or have different ideas. But they have to say who they are. And then we can actually have a conversation about it. When I was writing the column, and I would get responses every week, one way or another. I always wrote to the people who wrote sort of hateful and angry things first, just so that I could get them out of my head. So I would answer them initially. And I would say that probably a quarter of those people wrote back and said they never thought a real person would answer them. They apologized for being as nasty as they were. Sometimes we would actually engage in back and forth conversation. I mean, the other 3/4 just continued to think, you know, I should be wiped from the face of the earth or something. But that 1/4 sort of made it worth it to answer back. So yeah, unless you're actually going to be persecuted by your local government for using your real name, I don't have a lot of respect for that. Does that fit in, Ginny?
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Who would like to ask a question next?
Emma Maguchi has a hand up.
Huh?
Emma Maguchi has a hand up.
Emma, hi, Emma. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah,
Actually, it was my husband who put it up, but I just want to say one thing. I'm Sicilian.
Oh, what?
She's
Wait,
Sicilian.
what part? What part?
From Jarre, Catania.
Ah, very nice. I just went to Sicily for the first. I've been to Italy 10 times, and 2 years ago, or before the summer before the pandemic, we went to Sicily. And I came from my father's family came from outside Palermo, you know, and my grandfather worked in the sulfur mines, and so I had such an idea that Sicily was this terrible place. They fled, and then I went back, and it was so beautiful. And,
Yes.
you know,
Yes. My parents fled and left, and yes. So, but anyways, it's a pleasure to.
That's Emma Maguchi.
McGee. Yeah, it's Emma McGee.
They're friends.
Huh?
They're
Yeah,
friends.
that's not my last name is Catalano.
That's slightly different. It's a different, ends with another vowel, another kind of vowel in that.
John, you had a question.
Yeah, and I had a quick question, which was, I was going to ask if you spoke Sicilian.
Only the parts that you can't say out loud. Oh, really? I was saying that and actually when I was in Sicily and when I've been in Italy in the past, people would come up and ask me like for directions. And I'm going, no capisce. And they go, hey, bafango. They would think that I'm lying to them and I just don't want to engage. And I'm like, no, I'm really an American. I know how to say 3 things because I'm 64. And when my parents were raising me, the idea was that you were not supposed to raise, or the theory that they, whatever, Dr. Spock, I have no idea, said that you're supposed to raise children in one language. And that you were not supposed to confuse them, that they would have trouble acquiring language or something. So I'm so sad that I missed out on the possibility of doing that. And I took French at Dartmouth and confused my wonderful, a man named Richard Scaldini, Dick Scaldini was my teacher and compilated French. And I still remember the classes so well because he didn't know what to do with me because I couldn't write French for anything. But I could understand it and I could respond in English. And so I sort of didn't fit into where the usual class divide was. And so I got my lowest grade in French because he'd moved me from the beginner French to the advanced French, but then had to give me, because I couldn't write a decent paper, had to give me a C+. So it was sort of a gentleman's C. And, and I was so relieved I didn't fail, that it was like, I considered it a huge triumph. I was thrilled. I was afraid I was going to fail the class and have to take it over again. So I was so relieved at getting that C+, that was better than getting A's in other classes. I was thrilled. It's true.
So I'm going to jump in here, Gina. And again, I'm sorry my camera is not on because I'm having video problems. But can you tell me about the first time you stepped into Hanover? Can you tell me about the feeling when you came up the hill and you see the campus, whether it's as a high schooler or your beginning of your freshman year? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Thank you. My father drives me up in a 1967 Buick Skylark.
Really like it.
Right. And so we come up with this 1967 Buick Skylark, and the bridge was a much smaller bridge, right? It was like, didn't have all of the concrete balls that now greet us. I'm just saying what I see. The concrete balls that now greet us as we come into Hanover. So we're driving in this car, and my father left school in the 8th grade, but was an incredibly smart man. My mother also, they called them working papers for a reason. Both my parents went to work at 15. But he's driving me into Hanover, and we're looking, and all the cars are like BMWs and Mercedes Benzes, and we're looking around. And it was the first time that I got scared. And my father was a man of very few words, but it was clear my father was uneasy too. Again, my mother was gone, so it's just the two of us in the car. And he looks over at me, and I think he could see, because we were honest with each other, but protective of each other. And he looked at me and he said something that really made a difference, and I tell it to all of my students. And it's one of those lines that has gotten me through life, through 44 later years of life, since, or whatever, 40, however, do the math. I was 18, right? So whatever, 64 and 18. I didn't have to do math at Dartmouth. And he looked at me, this guy who had been a waist gunner and a radio man on a Liberator bomber, who flew over Munich and did, I think, 37 missions in a B-24. So this was no coward soul. This was somebody who had seen a lot in his life, a Purple Heart. But he was nervous too, driving me into this foreign territory with all the people from the planet Pepsidin. And he looked over at me and he said, "You don't like it? You take the next bus home." And that gave me courage, because it was like, they're not locking me up. They're not chaining me to a radiator. You know, this is not indentured servitude. You don't like it? You take the next bus home. And that gave me courage. It's like, I'll try it. It was like, I got 9 months before anybody expects me back. I'll try it. If I screw up, I screw up. Right? If I have to leave, I have to leave. I'll go back to Port Authority. I got bus fare. I always have, you know, I had 60 bucks. That's another Italian thing. I had 60 bucks in cash in my wallet, you know, since I was 15. I mean, I had the money in my, if I needed to leave, I needed to leave. I always had a current passport. You know, I didn't have a driver's license, but I had a passport. So, right? You don't like it? Take the next bus home. And I have told, and that's what I did. I got a Reynolds Fellowship to go to Cambridge University. Never been out of the country. Like, you don't like it, you take the next plane home. Took the job at UConn, where I've been for 34 years, had never visited the campus. Took the job without visiting the campus. Thought if I don't like it, I'll come back. I'll come back. I'll go back to Queens College, where I was an adjunct. It'll be okay. So that kind of courage, which translates to kind of unconditional love, a soft place to land, was very different from a lot of the people who I heard, you know, at Dartmouth, who were terrified of failure because of their parents, because they were there to triumph by proxy on behalf of the family, or that kids who had been there for 4 generations, like their families had been there for 4 generations, that if they didn't do, you know, what their fathers had done, especially for the girls, you know, if they were there and their dads had so much riding on them, or the moms who never got to go, they had a lot on their shoulders. And I felt like, I realized how lucky I was to have a blank slate. Like, you know, I could leave. No one was going to think worse of me. And so that way I could embrace the whole thing. So it was terrifying, Kim. It was absolutely terrifying. And yet I didn't realize that my fear, actually until much later, contextualizing it, that my fear was far less sort of poisonous and less deeply ingrained and much easier to shed, like a dog, you know, shedding its coat of rain, than a lot of other people who came up with really heavy old family baggage that they had strapped to their backs. And so, I mean, if I left, it was on me, but for them, they had a lot riding on it. So I think in retrospect, I had it easy.
What a great line from your dad. That's a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
That was great.
Literally, thank you. And I have had students write about this. I had a girl who wrote about my telling her the story that my father told me about it giving her permission. So many, again, especially young people, but at whatever point in our life that we need permission, and for people, it comes at different points, permission to fail is really important, because for a lot of people, permission to fail gives them permission to start, because they don't start if they don't think they're going to win. And what a drag. How sad is that? And it's certainly not the business of any kind of educational institution or any kind of teacher to, or as far as I'm concerned, any kind of parent, to instill that in somebody who's trying. Come on, nobody wants to argue? What's wrong with all you people?
No, I have to tell you, Gina, that at some of our other banquets, our worst argument that we had a speaker, Mark Bream, who is well known in this area as the weatherman for Vermont Public Radio. And he gave a wonderful talk, and he led us down, this was about 10 years ago, he led us down the path of understanding data and the difference between weather and climate. And later on, we found out that he had a degree in dramatics, so he may have been setting us up for this, but he came to the conclusion at the end of it that, that there was no global warming. Now, I don't know if he really believed it or he just wanted to get a reaction, because he sure got one from the alums who were very upset with him. And then we had another speaker who we had imported from Coral Gables, Florida, who had been the unnamed ambassador to Cuba, and Obama had just opened up Cuba. And we were having this banquet with, unfortunately, a sudden power outage, so we never got dinner. And he was having to speak to us like a third world country in the top of the hop with no microphone. And we were so excited that Cuba was being opened up, and we asked him about it, and he was very much against Cuba being opened up.
Oh.
So you may have people here that disagree with you. So I think they should feel free to raise their hands. Does anyone think that coeducation was a bad idea?
Oh, go on.
Oh, come on, somebody say so.
Come on, you're virtual, for God's sake. I can't smack you. No, these are all right-thinking people.
Yes, they're all right thinking.
Oh, they wouldn't be here. I mean, actually, it was interesting. I gave the dinner talk to the class of '64 at their 50th reunion.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting that there were some folks, some alums, who came up to me, and they were wearing the Indian tie.
Mm-hmm.
And came up and said, you know, I'm not sure that it was a good idea. Don't you think that there's room for single-sex education? And I actually do think that there's room for single-sex education. I just don't think that it can be for institutions that have as much power as places like Dartmouth. I think that, like, smaller places that are not the conduits to the positions of power that people from these institutions hold, or from flagship state universities, or from, if somebody really chooses to do that. I've spoken to the Independent Schools Gender Project. You know, there are still distinguished elementary and secondary schools that are single sex. I think there's a place for those. I just think that for the kind of institution that Dartmouth represents, and there are fewer and fewer of them, and we could see that by the rising number of applications to the school, that can't do it, can't lock the doors, can't make the gates smaller, can't do it that way, not on those conditions. So, but you know, it was an interesting thing for these folks to come up and say, I disagree with that. And it was interesting that some of them were women who had married the men of those classes, who felt that allowing women in the later classes in had diminished. We used to have such fun coming here on Carnival. And then, you know, like, that'll never be the same. And I'm thinking, no. And I was like, no, you're right, ma'am. It'll never be the same. That's right. And so, like, we can agree that it will never be the same. We're on exactly the same page on that topic. And now I need another drink. So that was, you know, it was fine.
So Gina has a question.
Yes, please.
No, I'm going to make a statement.
Okay, so Gina is a member, if you will, of the class of 1942.
Good.
I went to Vassar. And then I met on a train this handsome, attractive, wonderful man who had gone to Dartmouth. Never been to Dartmouth because it was too far. From Poughkeepsie to get to Hanover was impossible. Yale, Princeton, Harvard, you know, those were all great, not Dartmouth. Anyway, so I married a Dartmouth man, never having been here, but I found an old high school love who was teaching in the English department at Dartmouth, Professor Noel Perrin.
Oh, sure.
Well, and he and I grew up together. So anyway, I had lunch with Ned and said, so how's it going now with women? We said, oh, it's so much better. It's a much better place. So over the years, I loved Vassar. I thought it was the greatest education I could possibly have had. However, if I were to choose now, I would go to Dartmouth. So there you are.
What a testament. I mean, somebody has to be like embroidering that on like a flag. I mean, that's what we need. Can we have that instead of Daniel Webster over this? And Vassar, I mean, actually a friend of mine from high school, I went to a big public high school. We had like 910 people in my graduating class, which was like larger than many small states. And he went to Vassar. He was one of the first men at Vassar. And I mean, I think, and he had the same kind of trouble actually that I did at Dartmouth. We exchanged some lines. But I think that the faculty was always delighted.
Yeah, they are. By the way, one other quick little story. I was at a Vassar Alumni Council meeting after Vassar had gone co-ed, and we had a wonderful speaker. And I said to the speaker, so what's it like having men? How are they different from the women you're used to? And he said, well, they're engaged, they're smart, they have great senses of humor. And he said, I went to a basketball game the other night, Vassar men against Union men. And over the Vassar bench was a sign that said, "Go Big Pink."
Look, that's another, I won't even get into the comments that can be made about that. But boy, there are a lot of them. But I would need to do that while I was drinking in person with everybody there. But I think that's hilarious. But no, it's the more people that we have, the more voices, the more different, gangs, tribes, groups, community, perspectives that are represented. I mean, it makes a class better. I can tell you as a teacher, it makes a dinner party better. It makes any kind of community stronger. And that's not just rhetorically, that's really for real. If you got the same 17 people talking to each other and repeating the same stuff that they've heard for the last 400 years, it gets a little old, a little fast. And then people start, the inbreeding, people start to get eyes on the side of their head like flounder. I mean, it's really, you need to get some different possibilities going on in people's lives. But do we take one last question? And then I'm going to go, I get like the good feminist I am, I'm going to go make my husband dinner. I'm going to go. So do we have a last question? Come on.
So I have a question.
All right, Judith. Hello, Judith.
Hi, I'm Judy Collis. Dan is my spouse. Hi, and I just want you to know that I was a first class of women at Princeton.
Oh,
and so a lot of what you said completely resonated with me. I also transferred from Wellesley, so I have a real appreciation for the both types of education. But what's striking me right now is that most of the conversation has occurred among the women. And I'm just wondering if you're being so open some way, why are the men being so silent? And is this typical of a because it's not typical under most circumstances?
Fear.
Fear? Well, I'm such a nice lady. I'm making chicken. I got chicken.
Judy, we'll tell you in private.
You'll tell me in private.
Tell me in private. So obviously, I just find it interesting that the men are so silent right now, and I'm just because I resonate.
Babe,
I resonate so completely.
I was told to shut up.
No, I did not tell you.
Not by me.
I was told to shut up too.
I did not.
No.
So
A lot of folks from the Dartmouth Club of the Upper Valley have heard me speak on many occasions, and so they don't need to hear from me one more time.
That's very modest. You're all known for your modesty. It's astonishing. It's a great thing. Is John Hughes grilling, or is that something from Game of Thrones? What is that at the bottom?
No, I was trying to show a picture of my wife who's over here on another Zoom call. That's why I can't talk, because we're both on different Zooms.
There are always good reasons. There are always good reasons. And I'm just glad to meet all of you. And it's nice that the Broads felt they could talk. It's nice that they
Yeah,
felt. they
it's
could
great.
talk. I'm
It was
delighted.
great. We
I'm
loved
delighted.
it.
Thank you very much. Have me back when we could be in person. And I'll
Yes.
make sure that the gentlemen in the room feel at ease.
Yes, and we will be putting you on our YouTube Zoom channel. So we had at least one lady, poor Mrs. Schiffman, that couldn't get on here.
Oh,
And she was, so I'm wondering if maybe there were some other people that had trouble with their links. So, but like a fine wine, you will mellow in your YouTube.
now I'm not going to mellow. Trust me, I'm not mellowing. I'll be quiet like the guys, but I'm not mellowing. But good night. Thank
Grazie.
you so much.
Thank you so
Grazie
much.
Thanks, Gina.
Right.
Va bene.
Anytime.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Congratulations.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm being done with being president.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Sean.
That
And
was
I'll
great.
stay on if anybody.
you.